The courthouse steps felt cold beneath my boots as I clutched the deed in my trembling hands. 21 years old, and I was about to lose the only real home I had ever known to a man who claimed my grandfather owed him money. Kenneth Moore stood across from me with his expensive lawyer, smirking like he had already won. Behind me, the entire town of Cedar Ridge had gathered. Carol Gutierrez from the diner, Douglas Jimenez, who ran the feed store, even old Henry Jimenez, who barely spoke to anyone. They were all here for me. A kid who 6 months ago did not even know this place existed. The judge was about to make his ruling when Julie Jackson, the town librarian, came running up the steps with a dusty box in her arms. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me from my grandfather, Ronald Robinson. Letters that proved Kenneth Moore was lying about everything. As I held those letters, feeling the weight of a family I never knew I had, I realized my whole life had changed the day I walked out of St. Mary's orphanage with nothing but a backpack and a bus ticket. But let me take you back to where this all began, because the journey from having nothing to owning a 300-acre ranch is something I never could have imagined. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you are watching from and hype this video in the comments. I was 17 when I aged out of St. Mary's Orphanage in Chicago, 17 and completely alone in the world. The other kids called me lucky because I was finally free, but freedom felt more like falling into an endless void. I had spent my entire life in the system, bouncing between foster homes and group facilities, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. St. Mary's had been my longest placement, 4 whole years, and even that felt temporary. Sister Margaret handed me my belongings in a worn duffel bag and $50 in cash. She meant well, but her smile could not hide the worry in her eyes. Where do you go when you have nowhere to go? I had finished high school early and earned decent grades, but college felt impossible without money or family support. The plan was to find a maybe rent a room somewhere and figure out life one day at a time. I spent 3 years doing exactly that, working construction during the day, stocking shelves at night, sleeping in a tiny studio apartment that smelled like cigarettes and broken dreams. Chicago was expensive and unforgiving. Every month was a struggle to make rent and buy food. I told myself this was just temporary, that things would get better, but hope felt like a luxury I could not afford. Then on a Tuesday morning in March, everything changed. I was eating cereal for dinner and again, too tired to cook anything real, when someone knocked on my door. I never had visitors, so I approached cautiously. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in a business suit holding a briefcase. Rachel Ward introduced herself as a lawyer from Cedar Ridge, Kansas, a place I had never heard of. She asked if I was Ethan Wilson, son of Michael Wilson and grandson of Ronald Robinson. The names meant nothing to me. I had been abandoned at a hospital as a baby with only a first name pinned to my blanket. The state had given me the last name Wilson because that was the street where the hospital sat. Rachel Ward explained that my grandfather, Ronald Robinson, had died 6 months earlier and left me his ranch. 300 acres of farmland, a house, barns, equipment, and livestock. She handed me documents that traced my family history, showing how my father, Michael, had been Ronald's only son. My father had died in a car accident when I was 2, and my mother had disappeared shortly after, leaving me in the system. Ronald Robinson had spent 20 years searching for me. He hired private investigators, worked with social services, followed every lead. He never stopped looking for his grandson. The lawyer showed me copies of letters he had written to me over the years, letters that were never delivered because no one knew where I was. In those letters, he talked about the ranch, about how he hoped to teach me about farming and horses and what it meant to belong somewhere. I sat in my tiny apartment reading letter after letter from a grandfather I never knew existed. He wrote about morning chores and evening sunsets, about the satisfaction of growing your own food and caring for animals. He wrote about loneliness too, about how the ranch felt empty without family to share it with. In his final letter, written just weeks before his death, he said he was leaving everything to me because he believed family was more than blood. It was about love and legacy and giving someone a chance to build something meaningful. The inheritance came with conditions. I had to live on the ranch for at least 1 year and work the land. If I abandoned it or sold it within 5 years, everything would go to the local agricultural college. Ronald Robinson wanted to make sure his legacy went to someone who would appreciate it, not someone looking for a quick profit. I quit my jobs that same week. My landlord was happy to break the lease early since he could charge more for the apartment anyway. I packed my few belongings into the same duffel bag Sister Margaret had given me and bought a bus ticket to Kansas. As the city disappeared behind me, I felt something I had not experienced in years. Hope. The bus ride took 14 hours with stops in small towns that looked like movie sets. Everything was so different from Chicago. Open spaces stretched endlessly in every direction. The sky seemed bigger somehow, like there was room to breathe. When we finally pulled into Cedar Ridge, I understood why my grandfather had loved this place. Cedar Ridge had a population of 800 people and one main street lined with brick buildings that looked like they had been there for a century. Douglas Jimenez met me at the bus stop in a pickup truck that had seen better days. He was my grandfather's neighbor and the executor of the estate, a man in his 60s with weathered hands and kind eyes who spoke slowly and chose his words carefully. The drive to the ranch took 20 minutes through farmland that rolled like green waves toward the horizon. Douglas told me about my grandfather, how he was respected in the community but kept to himself after my grandmother died. He worked his land faithfully and helped neighbors during difficult times, but he carried a sadness about his lost family that everyone could see. When we turned into the driveway, I saw my inheritance for the first time. The farmhouse was a two-story white building with a wraparound porch and green shutters. It needed paint and some repairs, but it looked solid and welcoming. Behind it stood a red barn that housed the equipment and livestock. Fields of winter wheat stretched in every direction, and in the distance, I could see cattle grazing in fenced pastures. Douglas handed me the keys and said the house was fully furnished. My grandfather had hoped I would come home someday and wanted everything ready for me. Inside, the house felt frozen in time. Family photos lined the mantel, including pictures of my father as a young man that took my breath away. We looked almost identical. The kitchen was old-fashioned but functional, and upstairs were 3 bedrooms, including one that had been prepared for me with new bedding and clothes in my size. That first night, I sat on the porch and tried to process everything that had happened. A week ago, I was struggling to pay rent in Chicago. Now I owned more land than I could walk across in a day. It felt surreal and overwhelming. I had no experience with farming or ranching. I did not know how to care for cattle or operate the equipment in the barn. What if I failed and lost everything my grandfather had worked his whole life to build? Douglas returned the next morning with Carol Gutierrez, who owned the local diner and apparently served as the town's unofficial welcome committee. She brought enough food to feed a family for a week and practical advice about living in a rural community. Carol was in her 50s with graying hair and a no-nonsense attitude that reminded me of Sister Margaret. She explained that farming was not something you learned from books. It required hands-on experience and guidance from people who had been doing it their whole lives. That was when I met Jennifer King, my grandfather's foreman. Jennifer was 35 and had been managing the day-to-day operations of the ranch for the past 5 years. She lived in a small house on the property and knew every inch of the land. When my grandfather's health started failing, Jennifer had essentially been running everything herself. She was smart, capable, and initially very skeptical of me. Jennifer made it clear that she respected my grandfather tremendously and was not about to watch his life's work destroyed by some city kid who did not know a cow from a bull. She agreed to teach me the basics, but only if I proved I was serious about learning and willing to work hard. The first lesson was feeding the cattle, which sounds simple until you are trying to load hay bales that weigh more than you do onto a truck that keeps stalling. The learning curve was steep and humbling. I had always prided myself on being capable and independent, but ranch work required skills I had never developed. Jennifer showed me how to check fence lines, maintain equipment, and recognize signs of illness in the livestock. Every task seemed to have a dozen steps I had not considered, and mistakes could be expensive or dangerous. The community watched my progress with polite interest and reserved judgment. At the diner, conversations would stop when I entered, then resume in quieter tones. I knew they were discussing whether the city boy would make it or give up and sell the ranch to developers. Some probably had bets going about how long I would last. 3 weeks into my new life, I discovered the first real problem. Kenneth Moore, who owned the neighboring ranch, claimed my grandfather owed him $15,000 for cattle that were never delivered. He had documentation that looked legitimate and demanded immediate payment. If I could not pay, He would file a lien against the property and force a sale to recover the debt. I knew nothing about my grandfather's business dealings and had no way to verify Kenneth's claims. The ranch bank account had enough money for operating expenses, but not enough to pay a $15,000 debt. Jennifer insisted something was wrong because my grandfather was meticulous about record keeping and never left debts unpaid. But Kenneth's paperwork looked official. Rachel Ward, the lawyer who had first contacted me, explained that estate disputes were common and often complicated. She would investigate Kenneth's claim, but that would take time and money I did not have. In the meantime, Kenneth was pressuring me to sell him the ranch for enough to cover the supposed debt plus a small profit for me. He painted it as a generous offer that would save me from legal complications. I spent sleepless nights walking the property and trying to decide what to do. Part of me wondered if this was a sign that I did not belong here. Maybe I should take Kenneth's offer and return to Chicago with enough money to start over properly. At least in the city, I understood the rules and knew how to survive. But something about Kenneth Moore bothered me. He was too eager, too pushy, and his sympathy felt rehearsed. When he talked about helping me avoid legal troubles, his eyes held a calculating gleam that reminded me of predators I had encountered in the foster system. People who saw vulnerability and moved in for the kill. Jennifer noticed my distress and asked what was wrong. When I explained about Kenneth's claim, her reaction was immediate and fierce. She said Kenneth had been trying to buy my grandfather's land for years and had been refused every time. My grandfather believed Kenneth was the type of person who would destroy the land's character by subdividing it for development. Jennifer was convinced Kenneth was lying about the debt. That conversation changed everything for me. I realized I was not just fighting for property or money. I was fighting for my grandfather's legacy and the trust he had placed in me. Even though we had never met, he had believed that I was worth taking a chance on. He had spent years searching for me and preparing a place where I could belong. I could not let Kenneth Moore steal that away with lies and intimidation. I decided to fight the claim, even though it meant risking everything. Rachel Ward agreed to represent me, and we began investigating Kenneth's documentation. The more we dug, the more suspicious things became. The supposed contract was dated during a period when my grandfather had been hospitalized with pneumonia. The cattle Kenneth claimed to have delivered were a breed my grandfather had never raised. Most importantly, there were no corresponding entries in my grandfather's detailed financial records. While the legal investigation continued, I threw myself into learning ranch work with new determination. Jennifer became less skeptical as she watched me struggle through morning chores before dawn and work until sunset without complaining. I was clumsy and inexperienced, but I was also dedicated and willing to listen. Slowly, she began sharing more than just technical knowledge. She told me stories about my grandfather, about his character and values and the way he treated people. My grandfather had been the kind of man who helped neighbors during emergencies without expecting anything in return. When Douglas Jimenez's barn burned down, my grandfather had donated materials and labor to rebuild it. When Carol Gutierrez's husband died suddenly, my grandfather had quietly paid for the funeral expenses. He believed in community and mutual support, and people respected him for it. As I learned these stories, I began to understand why the town was watching me so carefully. They were not just curious about whether I could run a ranch. They wanted to know what kind of person I was and whether I shared my grandfather's values. Would I be a good neighbor and community member? Or would I be another outsider who took what he wanted and left? The answer came during my 6th week on the ranch. A spring storm brought heavy rains that flooded the creek running through several properties. Carol Gutierrez's elderly father lived alone in a house near the creek, and the rising water threatened his home. Jennifer and I joined the community effort to move his belongings to higher ground and sandbagging around the foundation. I worked alongside people who had been politely distant before, filling sandbags and hauling furniture through ankle-deep mud. Nobody asked if I knew what I was doing or treated me like an outsider. We were just neighbors helping a neighbor, and I was part of that we. When the water receded and the house was safe, Henry Jimenez, Douglas's father, who rarely spoke to anyone, shook my hand and said I was becoming a real part of Cedar Ridge. That night, I sat on my porch feeling something I had never experienced before. I belonged somewhere, not because of paperwork or legal documents, but because I had proven myself through actions and shared values. The ranch was not just property I had inherited. It was home. The legal battle with Kenneth Moore intensified as Rachel Ward's investigation uncovered more evidence of fraud. The contract signatures did not match samples of my grandfather's handwriting from the same period. The veterinary records Kenneth provided as proof of cattle delivery were from a different county entirely. Most damaging of all, Rachel discovered that Kenneth had used similar fraudulent claims against two other recently deceased ranchers in neighboring counties. Kenneth realized his scheme was falling apart and became increasingly desperate. He began spreading rumors in town that I was planning to sell the ranch to developers and destroy the rural character of the area. He claimed I was just a city kid playing at being a rancher until I could cash out and return to Chicago. Some people believed him, especially those who did not know me well. The rumors hurt more than I expected. After finally finding a place where I belonged, the thought that people might see me as a threat to their community was devastating. I had grown to love Cedar Ridge and its people. The idea of destroying what my grandfather had helped build was unthinkable. But Kenneth was skilled at exploiting fears and insecurities. Jennifer suggested I address the rumors directly by speaking at the next town council meeting. The thought terrified me because I had never been comfortable with public speaking, but I knew she was right. If I wanted to be part of this community, I needed to be honest about my intentions and let people judge for themselves. The town hall was packed on the night of the meeting. Kenneth Moore sat in the front row with several supporters, looking confident and entitled. I stood at the podium with my prepared speech, but when I looked out at all those faces, I forgot everything I had planned to say. Instead, I spoke from the heart about what the ranch and the community meant to me. I told them about growing up in the foster system without ever having a real home or family. I explained how my grandfather's gift was not just land and buildings, but the chance to belong somewhere and build something meaningful. I admitted I was still learning and would make mistakes, but I promised I would never do anything to harm the community that had welcomed me. The ranch would remain a working farm, and I hoped to raise a family there someday and pass it on to the next generation. When I finished speaking, the room was quiet for a long moment. Then Carol Gutierrez stood up and said she believed me. Douglas Jimenez stood next, followed by Jennifer, then Henry Jimenez, and finally most of the room. Even some of Kenneth's supporters looked uncertain about their allegiance. The formal vote was overwhelmingly in favor of supporting my fight against Kenneth's fraudulent claim. That show of community support gave me strength for the final legal confrontation. Rachel Ward had gathered enough evidence to not only defeat Kenneth's claim, but to file criminal charges against him for fraud. The day we went to court, it seemed like half of Cedar Ridge had come to support me. They filled the gallery behind me while Kenneth sat alone with his lawyer. The judge reviewed the evidence quickly and dismissed Kenneth's claim entirely. He also ordered Kenneth to pay my legal expenses and referred the case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. As we walked out of the courthouse, Kenneth made one last desperate threat about appealing the decision, but everyone knew he was finished. That evening, the entire town celebrated at Carol's Diner. She closed to regular customers and opened her doors to everyone who had supported me. People brought covered dishes and stories about my grandfather that I had never heard. I learned that he had quietly helped dozens of families over the years and that his generosity had touched nearly everyone in town. As the celebration wound down, Jennifer pulled me aside for a private conversation. She had been offered a job managing a much larger ranch in Colorado with significantly better pay and benefits. She had been planning to leave after my grandfather's death anyway, but she wanted to give me the option to match the offer if I needed her to stay. The request caught me off guard because I had come to depend on Jennifer's knowledge and guidance. The thought of running the ranch without her was intimidating, but I also understood this was an important opportunity for her career. After thinking it over, I told her she should take the Colorado job. I would miss her expertise and friendship, but I could not ask her to sacrifice her future for my comfort. Jennifer seemed relieved by my answer and promised to spend the next month training me on the more complex aspects of ranch management. She also recommended hiring Rachel Collins, a recent agricultural college graduate who was looking for hands-on experience. Rachel was young and inexperienced, but she had the theoretical knowledge I lacked and the enthusiasm to learn alongside me. The transition was smoother than I expected. Rachel Collins brought fresh ideas and modern techniques that complemented the traditional methods my grandfather had used. She was also closer to my age, which made our working relationship feel more like a partnership than a mentorship. Together, we began planning improvements to the ranch that would honor my grandfather's legacy while preparing for the future. One of our first projects was renovating the old bunkhouse to create comfortable housing for seasonal workers. My grandfather had done most of the work himself in his later years, but as the ranch grew, we would need help during planting and harvest seasons. The renovation became a community project, with neighbors volunteering their time and expertise in exchange for meals and friendship. Working alongside people like Douglas Jimenez and Henry Jimenez taught me skills that went beyond farming. I learned about craftsmanship and taking pride in work well done. I learned about the satisfaction of building something that would last for generations. Most importantly, I learned about the bonds that form between people who work together toward common goals. As my first year on the ranch progressed, I began to understand what my grandfather had tried to tell me in his letters. The land was not just a business or an investment. It was a responsibility and a privilege. Every decision I made would affect not only my own future, but the future of the animals, the soil, the water, and the community that depended on the ranch's success. That responsibility felt heavy sometimes, especially when I made mistakes that cost money or time. But it also felt meaningful in a way my previous jobs never had. In Chicago, I had worked to survive. On the ranch, I worked to build something lasting and valuable. The difference was transformative. By winter, I had proven to myself and the community that I could handle the basic responsibilities of ranch ownership. The cattle were healthy, the fields were properly prepared for spring planting, and the equipment was maintained and ready for the next season. More importantly, I had found my place in the social fabric of Cedar Ridge. I joined the volunteer fire department and helped with community fundraisers. I attended church with Carol Gutierrez and learned about the spiritual traditions that sustained many of my neighbors. I played poker with Douglas and Henry Jimenez and listened to their stories about the area's history and the families who had shaped it over generations. The first anniversary of my arrival in Cedar Ridge fell on a beautiful spring day when the fields were green with new wheat and the cattle were grazing contentedly in the pastures. Rachel Collins and I had successfully completed our first full planting season together, and the early results looked promising. I stood on the same porch where I had felt so overwhelmed and uncertain a year earlier, and marveled at how much had changed. I was no longer the frightened kid who had aged out of the foster system with nothing but a duffel bag and $50. I was a rancher, a community member, and the keeper of my grandfather's legacy. I had learned to read the weather and the land, to care for animals and equipment, to plan for seasons and prepare for challenges. Most importantly, I had learned what it meant to belong somewhere. The legal victory over Kenneth Moore had been satisfying, but the real victory was deeper and more personal. I had proven to myself that I could build a life worth living. I had found family in the community that had embraced me and purpose in the work that had sustained me. The ranch was no longer just an inheritance. It was home. That evening, I sat at my grandfather's desk and wrote my first letter to him. I knew he would never read it, but I wanted to tell him about the year I had lived on his land and what his gift had meant to me. I wrote about the challenges and victories, the people who had helped me, and the dreams I was building for the future. I told him about Rachel Collins and how we were planning to expand the organic vegetable operation he had started in his later years. I described the community garden project we were organizing to help families grow their own food and teach children about agriculture. I shared my hopes of someday raising children on the ranch and passing on the values he had tried to preserve. As I wrote, I realized that my grandfather's greatest gift had not been the land or the buildings or the livestock. It had been the opportunity to discover who I could become when I had a place to belong and work that mattered. He had given me not just a ranch, but a chance to build a legacy of my own. The letter became a tradition. Every month I wrote to my grandfather about life on the ranch and the decisions I was making as its steward. Sometimes I asked for guidance on difficult choices or shared my fears about the future. Other times I simply described the beauty of a sunset over the wheat fields or the satisfaction of a successful harvest. Writing those letters helped me stay connected to the values my grandfather had embodied. When I faced temptations to take shortcuts or prioritize profit over principle, I thought about what he would have done and tried to honor his example. When I struggled with loneliness or doubt, I remembered that he had faced similar challenges and found strength in his commitment to the land and community. 2 years after my arrival in Cedar Ridge, I received an unexpected visitor. Sister Margaret from St. Mary's Orphanage had driven from Chicago to see how I was doing. She had heard about my inheritance through social services and wanted to make sure I was adjusting well to my new life. Her visit was a powerful reminder of how far I had traveled, both geographically and personally. Sister Margaret toured the ranch with obvious amazement, marveling at the transformation from the scared teenager she had sent into the world with $50 and hope. She met Rachel Collins and Carol Gutierrez and Douglas Jimenez, and I could see her relief as she realized I had found not just a home, but a family. During her visit, Sister Margaret shared news about other kids from St. Mary's and asked if I would consider speaking to current residents about my experiences. She thought my story might give hope to teenagers who felt hopeless about their futures. The idea of returning to the orphanage was emotionally difficult, but I knew I owed something to the kids who were still waiting for their chance at a real life. My visit to St. Mary's was both heartbreaking and inspiring. I saw myself in the eyes of teenagers who had given up on the possibility of family or belonging. I shared my story honestly, including the struggles and failures, but emphasized that persistence and openness to help from others could lead to opportunities they could not imagine. One 17-year-old named Marcus reminded me especially of myself at that age. He was intelligent and capable, but had been disappointed so many times that he had stopped hoping for anything better. After my presentation, he asked if I really believed someone like him could find a place in the world. I told him that someone like him had found a place and that his story was still being written. That conversation led to a partnership between the ranch and St. Mary's. We began offering summer internships for older kids who wanted to learn about agriculture and rural life. Not all of them stayed or chose farming as a career, but they all learned valuable lessons about work ethic, responsibility, and the satisfaction of contributing to something larger than themselves. Rachel Collins embraced the internship program enthusiastically and became a mentor to several young people over the years. Her patience and teaching skills helped kids who had never been outside the city discover talents and interests they did not know they possessed. Some went on to agricultural colleges, others chose different paths, but all of them left the ranch with greater confidence and clearer vision for their futures. The program also enriched my own life by giving me a chance to pass on what I had learned and to see the ranch through fresh eyes. Each group of interns brought new energy and perspectives that challenged me to keep growing and improving. Their questions forced me to articulate why I had chosen this life and what I hoped to accomplish with it. As the ranch prospered and my role in the community deepened, I began to think seriously about starting a family of my own. The house felt too big for one person, and I wanted to share the life I had built with someone who understood its value. I had dated occasionally, but had not found anyone who seemed genuinely interested in rural life and its challenges. That changed when I met Julie Jackson at a county agricultural fair. Julie was a librarian in the next town over who had grown up on a farm before pursuing her education. She understood both the appeal and the difficulties of rural life, and she shared my values about community service and environmental stewardship. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally, built on shared interests and mutual respect. Julie brought her own strengths to the ranch and the relationship. Her research skills helped us access government programs for conservation and sustainable farming. Her connections in the education community opened doors for expanding our internship program and developing partnerships with schools. Most importantly, her presence made the ranch feel complete in a way I had not realized was missing. We married in the spring of my 4th year on the ranch, with the entire community of Cider Ridge in attendance. The ceremony was held in the field where my grandfather had proposed to my grandmother 50 years earlier, and the reception was in the barn where I had learned to work with my hands and understand the rhythm of agricultural life. Our first child was born the following winter, a daughter we named Sarah after my grandmother. Holding her in the house where my father had been born, I felt the full weight and joy of continuing the family legacy my grandfather had preserved for me. Sarah would grow up with the security and belonging I had never known as a child, but she would also inherit the responsibility of caring for the land and community that had shaped her family. Julie and I worked together to balance the demands of farming with the needs of raising children. We added a son, Mao, named after my father 2 years later, and then another daughter, Margaret, named after Sister Margaret, who had launched me into the world with such faith and hope. Each child brought new challenges and joys, and the ranch became not just a working farm, but a place where a family could grow and thrive. The children learned early about the cycles of planting and harvest, about caring for animals and respecting the land. They helped with age-appropriate chores and understood that their comfort and security depended on the success of the farm. But they also learned about play and imagination, about books and music and the world beyond Cedar Ridge. Julie insisted that they understand their father's story and the grandfather they would never meet but whose legacy they would inherit. We visited St. Mary's regularly so they could see where I had come from and understand the difference between having a family and being alone in the world. Those visits kept me grounded and grateful, even during difficult times. As the years passed, the ranch continued to evolve and grow. We expanded the organic vegetable operation and began selling directly to restaurants in nearby cities. We added agritourism activities that brought urban families to experience farm life and learn about food production. We partnered with the Agricultural College to conduct research on sustainable farming practices and climate adaptation. Each new venture required careful planning and significant investment, but they also diversified our income and strengthened our connections to the broader community. The ranch became known throughout the region as an example of how traditional farming could adapt to modern challenges while preserving essential values and practices. My role in the community evolved as well. I served on the school board and the county planning commission, helping to shape policies that would protect agricultural land and support rural families. I joined the State Farm Bureau and advocated for programs that help beginning farmers access land and resources. I spoke at conferences about sustainable agriculture and the importance of keeping family farms viable. These leadership roles were both rewarding and demanding. They required me to travel more than I preferred and to engage with political and economic forces that sometimes seemed hostile to rural values. But they also gave me a platform to advocate for the kind of community and agricultural system I wanted my children to inherit. The most meaningful recognition came when the county named me Farmer of the Year for my contributions to sustainable agriculture and community development. Standing on the same courthouse steps where I had once faced the possibility of losing everything, I accepted the award surrounded by family and friends who had supported me through every challenge and celebration. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the difference between inheriting land and earning the right to call it home. I credited my grandfather for giving me the opportunity, but I also acknowledged the community that had taught me how to use it wisely. I spoke about the responsibility we all shared to preserve what was valuable while adapting to change and preparing for the future. Now, 15 years after that scared 21-year-old stepped off a bus in Cedar Ridge with nothing but hope and determination, I can hardly recognize the person I used to be. The ranch has grown from 300 to 500 acres through careful acquisitions of neighboring land. We employ 6 full-time workers and twice that many during busy seasons. Our products are sold throughout the region, and our internship program has helped launch dozens of young people into successful careers. But the most important changes are not measured in acres or income. They are measured in the depth of relationships, the strength of community ties, and the sense of purpose that comes from meaningful work. I wake up every morning in the house where my father was born, surrounded by family and engaged in work that matters. I go to sleep every night knowing that I have honored my grandfather's legacy and built something valuable for the next generation. My children are growing up with the security and belonging I never had, but they are also learning the values and responsibilities that come with that privilege. Sarah is now 14 and already talking about studying agricultural science in college. Michael is 12 and shows a natural talent for working with animals. Margaret is 10 and loves the business side of farming, keeping detailed records of everything from egg production to profit margins. They understand that the ranch will be theirs someday, but they also understand that ownership is not just about rights, but about obligations. They know the stories of their grandfather who searched for family he never found, and their father who found family he never expected. They know about Kenneth Moore and the importance of standing up to people who would destroy what others have built. They know about community and service and the satisfaction of work well done. Julie and I have started planning for the transition that will happen someday when we pass the ranch on to them. We want to make sure they are prepared not just with technical knowledge, but with the wisdom and values that will help them make good decisions under pressure. We are establishing trusts and conservation easements that will protect the land from development while giving them the flexibility to adapt to changing conditions. The internship program has evolved into a formal partnership with 3 colleges that send students to spend semesters learning about sustainable agriculture and rural community development. We have also partnered with urban schools to bring city kids to the ranch for week-long programs that teach them about food production and environmental stewardship. These programs keep us connected to the broader world while sharing the values and knowledge we have accumulated. Looking back on my journey from orphanage to ranch ownership, I am struck by how many people played crucial roles in my success. Sister Margaret, who launched me with faith and $50. Rachel Ward, who found me and fought for me. Douglas Jimenez, who welcomed me and taught me. Jennifer King, who trained me and believed in me. Carol Roy Gutierrez, who fed me and adopted me. Julie, who loved me and built a life with me. And my grandfather, Ronald Robinson, who never stopped searching for me and never stopped believing I would come home. Their contributions remind me that success is never achieved alone. We all depend on others for opportunities, guidance, support, and love. The myth of the self-made person is just that, a myth. Real success comes from recognizing our interdependence and building relationships that strengthen everyone involved. That understanding shapes how I try to live now and what I hope to pass on to my children. I want them to be capable and independent, but I also want them to understand their obligations to others. I want them to be successful, but I want their success to contribute to the common good rather than come at others' expense. The ranch is thriving, the family is growing, and the community is strong, but I know that challenges lie ahead. Climate change is already affecting weather patterns and crop yields. Economic pressures continue to threaten family farms and rural communities. Social and political divisions sometimes strain the bonds that hold communities together. My children will face obstacles I cannot imagine and will need wisdom I am still developing. But I have faith in their ability to meet those challenges because I have seen what people can accomplish when they work together with shared values and common purpose. The same community that welcomed a scared kid from Chicago and taught him how to belong will be there to support and guide my children as they take on the responsibilities of leadership. I still write monthly letters to my grandfather, updating him on the ranch and the family and the community he loves so much. I tell him about Sarah's plans to study agricultural science and Michael's talent with animals and Margaret's head for business. I describe the conservation projects we have completed and the young people we have mentored and the partnerships we have built. Sometimes I ask him what he thinks about the changes we have made and the direction we are heading. I imagine him being proud of what we have accomplished, but also challenging us to do better and think more carefully about our impact on the land and the people who depend on it. His voice in my head has become my conscience and my guide. The letters also serve as a record of our journey and a reminder of how far we have come. When I read the early ones, I can hardly believe how uncertain and frightened I was in those first months. When I read the recent ones, I am amazed by the complexity and richness of the life we have built together. Next month marks the 16th anniversary of my arrival in Cedar Ridge, and we are planning a celebration that will bring together everyone who has been part of our story. Former interns will return with their families. Neighbors who helped during those early difficult days will share memories and advice. Julie's family and friends from her hometown will join the festivities. Even Sister Margaret, now retired but still sharp and caring, will make the trip from Chicago. The celebration will be held in the same barn where we held our wedding reception, and I plan to speak about the journey that brought us all together. I want to thank the people who took chances on me and helped me become the person I am today. I want to acknowledge the challenges we have overcome and the lessons we have learned. Most importantly, I want to talk about the future and the legacy we are building together. If you are watching this and wondering whether your own story can change as dramatically as mine did, I want you to know that it can. The circumstances will be different, the opportunities will be unique, but the possibility of transformation is always there for people who are willing to work hard and accept help from others. Maybe you are aging out of foster care like I was, wondering where you belong and how you will survive. Maybe you are struggling in a job that pays the bills but does not feed your soul. Maybe you are inheriting something you do not understand or facing challenges that seem impossible to overcome. Whatever your situation, remember that you have more strength and potential than you realize. The key is to stay open to possibilities you cannot imagine and to accept help from people who believe in you even when you do not believe in yourself. Be willing to work hard and learn from your mistakes. Be grateful for opportunities and generous with others who need what you can offer. Build relationships based on mutual respect and shared values rather than just personal advantage. Most importantly, remember that belonging is not something you find, but something you create through your actions and choices. Home is not a place you discover, but a place you build with the people who matter to you. Family is not just about blood, but about love and commitment and shared responsibility for each other's well-being. I found my home on a ranch in Kansas that I never knew existed, with a family I never knew I had, in a community that welcomed a stranger and helped him become a neighbor. Your home might be somewhere completely different, but it is out there waiting for you to find it and claim it and make it yours. So wherever you are watching from, whatever challenges you are facing, whatever dreams you are pursuing, remember that your story is still being written. The next chapter could be the one that changes everything. Stay hopeful, stay open, and never stop believing that you deserve a place where you belong and work that matters and people who love you for who you are. Thank you for joining me on this journey from orphanage to ranch ownership, from loneliness to belonging, from having nothing to having everything that matters. If this story touched you or reminded you of your own journey, please share it with others who might need to hear it. Leave a comment about where you are watching from and what home means to you. Subscribe for more stories about the power of community, the importance of persistence, and the possibility of transformation that exists in every human life. The ranch where I write these words is quiet now, with my family sleeping upstairs and the cattle settled in the pastures under a sky full of stars. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities, but tonight I am simply grateful for the journey that brought me here and the people who made it possible. This is home, this is family, this is the life my grandfather dreamed of, and I have been blessed to live.